I'm thinking there's something long-term here, but before I just sign the check and buy the car, before I just pop the question and put a ring on her finger, I need to make sure. It's a process of prayer and discernment and being slow, but also being intentional and full of integrity. If you brought a Bible, go ahead and turn to Song of Solomon, chapter 1. Are you guys enjoying this series so far? I hope it's been practical and helpful. That's the point of this. We never, here at Awaken, we never dance around controversial issues. We're going to say it. In fact, if it's in the Bible, we're going to talk about it. And one theme in one topic that is all throughout the pages of Scripture is relationships. And how about this? Would you believe that in just the first 2 weeks of Song of Solomon, we've seen 12 people make faith decisions? Isn't that amazing? 12 people in 2 weeks. And that's a huge deal. We got a note from somebody who was tuning in online somewhere, I think it was Colombia recently. And they said, it's so refreshing to watch online in a place that is so dark where people are responding to the gospel in Clarksville, Tennessee. And what a cool thing. And somebody was asking me the other day, why do you think so many people have made faith decisions just in the first couple weeks of a series called Naked? Like what is the thing? And I think this is it. This series is speaking to us in places where we tend to be the most broken. Relationships, right? What we're doing is allowing God's word to do what it does best, and that's expose the dark, secret areas of our lives that a lot of times we kind of just honestly don't really want to talk about. And so as we allow God's word to do that, it can really speak to us in ways that will lead to great change. And so here we are in Song of Solomon. We're continuing today, end of chapter 1 into chapter 2. And Song of Solomon, in case you're not aware, is kind of like the Bible's Cinderella story. King Solomon falls in love with this girl who is one of the vine keepers. And probably a bit of a scandal for him to do that. And yet he's just so excited about falling in love with her. And so they begin to pursue this romantic relationship. If you were here last week, we talked about this attraction phase. And if you know anything about Solomon, you know that although he writes a lot of wise words here, he wasn't always wise in the relationship department. In fact, 1 Kings chapter 11 tells us that most likely years after this book was written, King Solomon got carried away with women. And literally eventually gave into hundreds and hundreds of other romantic relationships. And so, although he was wise, although he had a lot of great wisdom, godly wisdom, he didn't always follow his own advice years down the road. But this book was written most likely about his first love, his first crush, you might say. I don't know if you guys can think back to your first crush. Mine happened when I was in first grade, okay? In fact, I found a yearbook picture of first grade Kevin. Would you guys like to see first grade Kevin? First grade Kevin, there I am. Come on, look at that stud, man. What a guy. What a guy. Yeah, what happened? Security. No, I'm kidding. So for me in first grade, there was this girl who sat next to me in Mrs. Sod's first grade class. Her name was Andrea, and she had golden blonde locks. Do we have that picture of Andrea? There she is. Golden, look at that braid. Come on, she's so cute. And then in third grade, there was Deborah. Put up that picture of Deborah. There's Deborah. Deborah, what all the boys loved about Deborah was that she could run faster and do more pull-ups than all the boys. So Deborah, I remember, in fact, one PE, we had to go out to the playground at the monkey bars and do our pull-ups test. And I remember hanging there, straining, trying to do one pull-up, and I couldn't even do one. I was swinging my body. Could somebody spot me? I couldn't do one. Deborah got up there, boom, 10 pull-ups. All the boys were like, wow, right? So those are my first crush. You could take those down, please. Take those pictures down. So King Solomon, here's the difference. This is probably his first love that he's falling in love with here. But here's the difference. Now, there actually are quite a few differences between me and King Solomon. One, he's a king. Two, he lives in a palace. Three, he sits on a throne. Like, I could go down the list. There's quite a few differences. But one that I'm going to highlight today is the title of the message. It's 3 letters. Write it down. PDA. You know what I'm talking about? PDA, Public Display of Affection. Now, you know, because some of you are that couple. You know what I'm talking about? The PDA couple. Everybody else is like, here they go again. Jeez. Or you've at least been around the PDA couple. I was once with the PDA couple, bowling. It was me, and it was back in my single days, like Alicia was talking about. I got invited to be, and then I wished I hadn't got invited because it was so awkward. Like, they'd bowl, and then the girl would get like knock 6 pins down, and oh man, I only got 6. And he's like, girl, you're a 10 in my book. Come over here, right? They're kissing, and I'm like, I guess I'll just eat my bowling alley nachos over here while you guys do your thing, right? PDA, Public Display of Affection. And King Solomon and Shulamite are publicly they're getting to a place where they're going from just attraction. They noticed each other and kind of started talking to now the relationship is in what we would call the attachment phase. They're now hanging out with each other. They're getting to know each other. They're on some dates. And the way I'm going to interpret chapter 1 and chapter 2 is that it's pre-marriage and that there's nothing sexual taking place in their relationship just yet. Now, there are differing interpretations of the book of Song of Solomon, and there are a few verses you will see that could be interpreted that we're going to talk about today pretty sexually. But I believe the context speaks to the fact that her friends are around and this is still taking place before the marriage takes place in chapter 3 and chapter 4. So we're going to talk today about just some more practical thoughts on what it looks like for us to be in that phase of going from attraction to attachment and how we can honor God in that. Let's pick up in Song of Solomon chapter 1, verse 8. I'm going to read through the end of the chapter into chapter 2, verse 7. I'm going to kind of talk through some of this as we go, and then we'll unpack it for a few minutes together. Chapter 1, verse 8. If you remember last week, we ended with verse 7, and she said, where are your flocks going to be at noon? I want to go hang out with you, basically. And now in verse 8, he speaks to her. If you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock, and pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents. I compare you, my love, he says, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels. So obviously he's bought her a necklace or something. He's just praising her for how beautiful she is. Her friends speak up. We will make for you ornaments of gold studded with silver. See, these are some good friends. They're like, girl, you need to look good on your date. We got you covered with some necklaces, okay? I got you some ornaments of gold. Every girl needs a good friend that will provide her with some good ornaments of gold. Could I get an amen from the females? Okay, verse 12. While the king was on his couch, my nard gave forth its fragrance. Nard was an expensive, exquisite flower from the Middle East that basically was used as a perfume. Now, I want to preface you with that because the next couple verses can sound pretty sexual, and I want to help you understand what's happening. Verse 13, my beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breasts. Now, I want to highlight, it is not Solomon that is lying between her breasts, okay? She says, he is like the sachet of myrrh that lies between my breasts. What she's saying is, there was back in this day, this little sachet of myrrh and this nard flower that would hang around a necklace around her neck that would give off this beautiful smell. She's saying, being around him is just so refreshing. That's the idea here. Verse 14, my beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-gedi. Now, again, I'm trying to help you understand because I know you're reading this like, what the heck does that mean, okay? En-gedi back in the Bible days, in fact, even today, Jen and I just a couple years ago got to travel to Israel. Part of what we saw was En-gedi. En-gedi is this desert wasteland. It's hot. The part of the year we were there was February, and it was hot and dry and brown, except as you kept walking, there was amazing waterfalls, and it was an oasis in the middle of the desert. She goes, being around him is like this incredible oasis. And even when everything else feels like a desert, he brings me refreshment in life. Verse 15, he speaks to her, behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. She speaks back, behold, you are beautiful. No, you are. No, you are. That's what they're saying. You can pick up on this? My beloved, truly delightful. Our couch is green, most likely speaking of maybe they're on a picnic. Their couch, she's not literally sitting on a green couch. She's saying the grass is green beneath us. Now look at verse 17. The beams of our house are cedar. Our rafters are pine. It sounds like they're seated on some grass looking up at some trees, probably out on a picnic together. Now, chapter 2, verse 1. Now she speaks of herself. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And he tells her, as a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. Now she says to him, as an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight, I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. His left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. Now their presence speaks to me, the context seems to me that since they're around, this is not something that's sexual that's taking place here. But she speaks to them as they're around, maybe even at this banqueting table. And she says, by the gazelles or the does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. What an incredible passage of scripture and some beautiful communication that's happening between these two. I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about this attachment phase. If you find yourself in a place where you are pursuing someone, dating or engaged, there's a lot that you can learn from this. But it's not only for you. It's for you if you're thinking this may be your future one day, take some notes and be prepared. Parents, if this is for anybody, it's for us. Not only can we learn a couple things, not only can we learn to not lose the romance in our relationships, but maybe even more importantly, I'm going to talk to you today about some things that if you'll take some notes, you're going to help be able to guide your kids through these treacherous times of relationships and romance as they grow up. So all of us have something to learn today. I want to give you 3 thoughts today from Song of Solomon. Number 1 is this: build a foundation of communication. Every strong relationship is built on strong communication. Now, it's not the only thing that makes a relationship last. I feel like it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The most important thing in a relationship is that Jesus is at the center. So, although that may go without saying, I say it anyway because sometimes we lose sight of that and everything else seems to be okay. So why is that such a big deal? Everything else will fall apart if Jesus is not at the center, okay? We got to start there. You got to find, if you're pursuing someone romantically, the number one thing is that they love Jesus. I love this about my wife because sometimes we'll hear of somebody who, started dating somebody, and especially if it's a girl that Jen has a relationship with, the first question my wife will ask that girl is, does he love Jesus? It's the first most important thing you should think about, okay? Now, after that, one very important thing is communication. There's a lot of communication all throughout this book. I can tell that this book was written before smartphones because they're talking to each other, okay? You know what I'm talking about. They're not just scrolling through Instagram on their dates. They actually notice the grass and the trees around them, if you can imagine, lifting our heads beyond our screens, and they're talking to each other, and it's almost like we intercepted this mushy love note. You know what I mean? In fact, this week, I found a love note that Jen wrote to me. She doesn't know that I found this. This was not a name she normally called me, but she called me Schnookums in this note. Oh, which I love. And then she signed it, your number one sweetie pie, Jen, XOXOXOXX. And I was like, yeah, girl, that's right. But here's the funny thing about this note. I realized this as I looked at it this week. It's written on a page that used to say Bible study notes up here. And there's a place where you can write in who the speaker is, the scripture reference, your notes, and the application or things to do. And I noticed that none of those are filled in. And so I'm thinking, if this happened during a Bible study, apparently she was a little distracted. I don't know. Her mind was elsewhere, you know. And I don't know. I imagine there's been something, a note that you've passed or communication that you've had with somebody that like if somebody intercepted it like this, we would be a little like, okay, let's move on. That's a little too mushy for me, you know. And here they are just exchanging all of these words and gifts, and they're going on dates. And I mean, he's telling her some things that at first glance, you're like, should you have even said that? Because like in verse 9, he goes, you're a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. You are a female horse among chariots. That's what he's saying. Like, what is he getting at? Here's what he's saying. Just like if you let a female horse go around the stallions and all of those stallions are paying attention to this female horse that's going all over the place, he goes, you get people's attention. You are beautiful. You grabbed my attention. They're talking they're exchanging. You are beautiful. No, you are beautiful. And we're in this beautiful place. And they're talking through all of this. And apparently he's bought her jewelry. By chapter 2 and verse 4, they're at the banqueting house. He's taken her on these dates. It sounds like they went on a picnic. And so here they are communicating over and over in many different ways. They're communicating through their words. They're communicating through their actions. They're communicating through their time that they are committed to one another. But one thing that I really love about this is that you might remember from chapter 1 that Shulamite was apologetic for her appearance. Do you remember that? She felt really bad. She said, don't look at me. You could read it in chapter 1. Don't look at me because my skin is so dark. Remember, we talked about this. Dark skin back in her day meant she had been forced to work manual labor out under the sun. And so she sees this handsome man strolling through the garden, and she goes, don't look at me. My skin is so dark. She's apologetic for the way that she looks. And yet Solomon sees right past. Remember we talked last week, heart over hot, right? It's far more important what's on the inside than the outside. He believes not only is she beautiful on the inside, but even on the outside. And she praises her about her beauty. Over and over and over, he's speaking these words over her, and it has a change. It causes a change in her. She was apologetic in chapter 1, but did you notice chapter 2, verse 1? She says about herself, I'm a rose. I'm a lily. It's almost like you can sense her confidence rising. Because it turns out that affirmation and encouragement is an antidote to insecurity. So I think we can learn a lot from that. If you are one who feels insecure about something, it could be your looks, but it could be any number of other things in your life. You need to make sure that you are surrounded by people who will encourage you in your gifts, encourage you in whatever that thing may be. I'm not saying get yes people around you. I'm just saying we all need affirmation and encouragement in different times. And then we also, not only do we need to receive that, be willing to receive that, but we need to be quick to give it as well. I think it's so important that you don't just, oftentimes we think positive things about other people, but one thing I'm not always good at is oftentimes when I think something positive about somebody, I'm not always good at voicing it. And so one thing that I'm trying to get in the habit of doing is when I think something positive about somebody, I say it and I pray it. Here's what I mean. I want to tell that person. I want to be specific to that person. Hey, this is something I really appreciate about you. And then I take just a quick moment. It doesn't need to be a 30-minute prayer. Thank God for that person and about that specific thing that came to mind. Like how powerful that would be, right? And so her confidence is raising. Now, why do we start here about building a foundation of communication? Because communication is one of the bedrock foundational things to any lasting relationship. When you find somebody who's been married multiple decades, chances are, although they're still learning in many aspects, they've gotten really good at communicating with one another. They know how to, in a healthy way, voice things that need to be voiced in their relationship. In fact, I think that it's so important in this phase because what we're going to talk about even here in just a couple minutes is that a lot of the skills that you should be cultivating while dating are skills that will be foundational to a lasting marriage in the long run. And communication is one of those. In fact, if you think about it, my theory is that most marriages that end in divorce happen because, if you boil it down, there was a breakdown in communication. Right? Like I know that there's a lot of differing reasons for a divorce, but whether it was they didn't voice their opinion in a healthy way, they didn't voice their need in a healthy way, they didn't voice expectations in a healthy way, those are all a breakdown in communication, Some people will say, well, we just fell out of love. Well, somewhere down the road, you didn't communicate that love or the lack thereof very well. I mean, you could look across all kinds of different things, and when people go outside of their marriage to get needs met, ultimately, they're probably not communicating their needs very well within the marriage, and there's probably not a lot of real good, healthy communication within the marriage. So why do we talk about building a foundation of communication? It's because if this relationship is going to last, it's going to have to be built on some really good, open, honest communication. Here in the next couple weeks, we're going to get to, as we continue through chapter 2, talking about how we deal with conflict in a relationship. You're going to have to be able to openly, honestly communicate. Otherwise, you can't expect it to be able to go anywhere. Communication is key. It's so important for the foundation of a marriage. Let me talk to you about a second idea that I see right here. And that's just a couple words that I think need to define any relationship, especially in the dating phase. Write this down. Here's number 2. Be intentional and full of integrity. Intentionality and integrity are 2 words that really need to define a dating relationship. One thing I admire about Solomon here is that he doesn't waste any time. He doesn't waste his time. He doesn't waste her time. He's not leading her on, like maybe he likes her, maybe he doesn't. He's very, very clear about his intentions. You can hear this in the way they complement each other. Chapter 2, verse 1, she says, I'm a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. He says, as a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. He goes, well, you're not just a lily. In fact, you are a lily that is so beautiful that you make all of the other women look like thorn bushes. That's basically what he's saying. And everybody's like, oh, that's so nice of him. And he's upfront and clear. She then comes back and compares him as an apple tree in the forest. Now think about that imagery for a moment. Imagine if you're walking through the darkness of the forest and you find an apple tree. That would seem kind of random. It would stand out, right? That's what she's saying. You stand out among all of the other guys. A forest is a place with darkness and potential danger. And she says, but being around you is like being under a shade tree, and you keep me nourished like an apple tree would. And so they're just going back and forth with how they feel about each other. By the time they get to verse 4, they're in the banqueting house. And she says, his banner over me was love. In some way, maybe even that we're not reading about here, but we know of at least through his words and his gifts and his time, he's communicating, he's publicly displaying his affection for her. And so he's gone all out in some way. He hasn't lost his mind, but he's gone all out in some way to demonstrate that he is really committed to this girl and what his intentions are in this relationship. If he was on Instagram, she would be like his Woman Crush Wednesday every week, okay? If he was Buddy the Elf, we all know what he would say. I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it, right? This is Solomon. He's like, whatever I need to do to make this clear, I want you to know. I want everybody to know. And so she looks at their relationship and she just goes, man, the banner over my life is that I'm loved. What an incredible way. This girl went from apologizing for her appearance to feeling loved and nourished and secure and taken care of. Men, this is how you lead a woman. Women, if you are dating someone who isn't going to take good care of you, you are worth more than that. Move on. If I could give you some real clear advice, if he or she is not marriage material, move on. Don't waste your time. Don't waste her time. Let me give you an illustration. Think about dating, and I want to clarify this. Think about dating like a test drive. Okay, let me help you understand. You're not test driving sexually, but you are test driving in a way socially and spiritually. Here's what I mean by this. You're being intentional. What do you do when you go for a test drive? Normally, you don't just test drive just to test drive. Typically, if you go all the way to a place that you're going to potentially buy a car and you eye the car and you found the salesperson and they actually get in the car and you take it for a spin, most of the time, by the time you're test driving a vehicle, you're pretty intent on, I'm thinking this might be the vehicle for me. But before I make a long-term commitment, are you picking up what I'm saying? Before I make a long-term commitment to this vehicle, I want to get in and ask some questions. And I want to look around, and I want to make sure that this is right for me, and I want to make sure that this is a good fit. And so that's what the test drive is to the car, what dating, I believe in many aspects, should be to marriage. Now, again, I want to clarify. I'm not saying test drive sexually. There are far too many people who are doing this, and it's becoming destructive to their relationships and their marriage down the road. Hands off. We're going to talk about this here in the next point, but we need to keep a lot of barriers and physical boundaries between us in these relationships outside of marriage. But the whole purpose, remember, the whole purpose of a test drive is you're being intentional. I've got a plan. I'm thinking there's something long-term here. But before I just sign the check and buy the car, before I just pop the question and put a ring on her finger, I need to make sure. It's a process of prayer and discernment and being slow, but also being intentional and full of integrity. And I admire this about Solomon, because we live in this, you guys know, swipe right, hook up, one night stand culture where there is no intentionality and integrity in dating. We date to date. Find a girlfriend because I lost my last girlfriend. We get in a relationship because everybody else in my grade is in a relationship. And so I'm the third wheel on all the dates. So I got to find a guy, I got to find a girl to go with me, and we'll just kind of like whatever. And, there's no plan, there's no intentionality. I meet far too many people who are dating just as a filler for loneliness. Can I just warn you, if you are dating to fill loneliness or boredom, it is a setup for temptation and heartbreak. Be intentional in your dating relationships. We teach our kids this all the time. This is why it's so important that in middle school and high school, they grow up knowing that if I'm going to be in a relationship with somebody, it's with the intent that this person may be someone I would marry. And like I said earlier, if they're not marriage material, move along, right? And dads, moms, you might need to sometimes step in and help your kids with that. Okay? We'll talk about that here in a moment as well. Be intentional and full of integrity. I'm telling you, if intentionality and integrity define your dating relationship, you're going to go real far in honoring God. Number 3, write this one down. Dating is a rush, but it shouldn't be rushed. Dating was designed, relationships were designed, romance was designed to be a rush. Think about it. A rush of blood, a rush of hormones, a rush of emotions. I mean, you can just sense this right here in verse 5. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, I'm sick with love. She goes, somebody hook me up with some raisins or something to eat. I'm feeling faint. This guy's treating me so good. His left hand is under my head. His right hand embraces me. But here's what she says. End of verse 7. Do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. Relationships were designed. Romance was designed to be a rush. And so because of that, we need to be extra careful with how we interact with a member of the opposite gender. It's so important that we let this sink in. Here's, I think, what this is saying. Don't stir up or awaken love until it pleases. It's not saying don't stir up or awaken love until you feel that it's right. It doesn't say don't stir up or awaken love unless you're pretty sure he's the one. Do not stir up or awaken love unless you're really into her. That's not what it's saying. It's saying, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. In other words, the time is coming where it will be within the right context to stir up and awaken love. That context is what? Marriage. Don't stir up or awaken love outside of that context. Translation, don't get it started until you can finish it, okay? Don't get on first base if you can't make a home run. Are you picking up what I'm laying down here? Okay? There's no point in going down this road. Here's something real practical. People who are unmarried, something real practical that if you'll live by this, it's going to really help you. Ready? Clothes on, hands off. Turns out it's pretty hard to get sexual with each other when you're living by those two things. Hands off, clothes on. And if we'll live by that, I'm telling you, this is where this comes into play. Do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. The time will come where it should be stirred up and awakened within marriage. But until that time comes, be careful. Because here's the thing. Outside of marriage, before marriage, the best way to demonstrate love is not by having sex, but it's by saving sex. And I know that the way God built our bodies was to come together and fulfill the relationship in that way, but that's to be done with one person within marriage. That's the context for it. When it happens outside of that, it can become destructive and dangerous. Ask anyone, myself included, who have gone down the wrong road and who have been damaged and hurt by relationships that we pursued outside of or before marriage. It's destructive and dangerous. And so I hope that we would understand that relationships, romance was designed to be a rush, but we need to pump the brakes in the dating scene. Slow down. I'm not talking about leading them on or wasting time. I'm just saying let's slow down, get to know them, honor God. Here's the thing. If you want to make a long-term relationship decision with that person, you need to be clearly thinking. And science tells us that when you are physically involved with someone, you can't think clearly. God, in fact, designed our brains to work that way so that we would be bonded with one another through the act of sex. But when that takes place before marriage, you can't think logically, and you can very quickly begin making decisions and crossing more lines that you know you never should have because you're unable to think because of what you're doing. Does this make sense? I'm trying to be as practical as I can with this. Now, again, this is not just a message for the single, dating, engaged people. All of us have something to learn in here. And I want to just take a quick moment and speak to the parents in the room. And maybe even to start off with the dads. Because there's this running joke, and dads, you've probably used it or heard it. It was used on me. There's a running joke that dads with daughters should own shotguns. You know what I'm talking about? In fact, Jen's dad told her this. I don't know if he told me this or not. I don't think he did, but I knew about it. He told her that when I came to pick her up on our first date, he would be cleaning his shotgun on the front porch. Now, of course, it was a joke, and I get the context of the joke, but I'm afraid of its implication. Now, follow me on this. I'm afraid of the implication that dads need to own shotguns to destroy the young men who their daughter is gonna bring home. Here's the implication. The implication is your daughter's gonna do a really bad job at choosing who she brings home. I'm afraid that that's the implication. So I believe the greater thing for us to do is not own the shotgun, but to sit down with our daughters, dads, sit down with our daughters regularly and have ongoing, open, honest communication, because I'm thinking that if we do it right, if we train our kids correctly, if our daughters begin to see who they should be looking for, here's the best part, we're not gonna have any young men to shoot. You don't need to clean your shotgun because she's going to hopefully choose someone who's a God-honoring, intentional man of integrity. That's who you want to bring. And I know there are daughters, and we don't want to think of letting them go, but let's be honest. One day we need to release those arrows. Arrows aren't meant to stay in the quiver. We need to sharpen the arrows, aim them. That's the ongoing, honest, open communication. And this is not to say that this is not to be condemning toward, if there are those of you parents whose kids have just chosen the wrong thing, kids are going to make bad decisions. This is not designed to be condemning towards those who have had kids, who are making bad decisions in this realm. But the idea here is that it is our God-given responsibility. Listen to me very closely as parents. It is our God-given responsibility to train our children in the ways of the Lord. They will make their own decisions, but if they're going to choose sin, it should not be because you didn't have enough of a conversation with them. If they choose sin, it should be them deciding, well, fine, I know what I should do, but I choose to rebel. And that's on them if their response to our conversation isn't on us. Parents, you are to be their parent first and their friend later. I meet far too many parents who are friends first and parents maybe. And it is a God-given honor and responsibility that we have to help our children navigate the treacherous road of relationships, sex, and romance. You don't want your kids ending up in shipwreck any more than I do. And so we need to do everything that we can do to help them with these principles as they make wise decisions. I hope that makes sense, and I've been clear on that. That's never in any way, none of what I'm attempting to say today is to be condemning, because I know that there are people all across this place who have broken these and they've stepped outside of this, and some of you are living right now in the destruction and the pain of decisions that you've made. And I want you to understand this today. The Song of Solomon, it's this story of this public display of affection of a real couple. But you don't have to dig too deep to see the story of God's love for us throughout this. She said of Solomon that his banner over her was love. Public display of affection. Think about it. There has never been a more public display of affection than the cross of Jesus Christ. Romans 5:8. God demonstrates his own love toward us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so I just find this amazing, because here's Shulamite, who was apologetic for her appearance, and yet now just 2 chapters in, she's now speaking highly of herself because of the truth that has been spoken to her and over her life. And I hope to do the same for you today on behalf of King Jesus. See, here's King Solomon speaking truth into her life. I hope to communicate some of King Jesus's words to you today. No matter how insecure or damaged you may feel, listen to me very closely. In Jesus, you are forgiven and made whole. You are called by his name. You are purchased by his blood, and you have massive potential for the future. Jesus does not see you as a failure. Your failure is not a person. It's an event. It's something that you did. It is not who you are. You don't have to be your past. You are who you are in Jesus Christ. Is anybody listening? And this is the calling that we have to proclaim over our lives today. So I hope today, if you walked in here feeling like damaged goods, like, man, I don't even know if I want to hear all this stuff because I've done it all wrong. Listen, in Jesus, you are forgiven. His banner over you is love. What's the banner? The cross. He bought you. When you didn't care about him, in our sin, Jesus died for us. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Kevin Miller Podcast. It would mean so much if you would rate this podcast on the platform where you watch or listen. That will help us reach more people with the good news of the gospel. As always, find out more at kevmill.com or follow on Instagram or Facebook.